Welcome to FreightWeekSTL 2024. I'm Mary Lamey, Executive Vice President of Multimodal Enterprises for Bi-State Development. Yesterday marked a key event of FreightWeekSTL as we hosted the in-person Freight Summit. Our keynote conversation was with Shane Gill on infrastructure investment as an economic driver. He highlighted the significance of investment occurring in the St. Louis region and its impact on regional and the national freight networks. He also spotlighted the work being done to foster the development, operation, and maintenance of an integrated transportation system. We also released the 2025 Priority Projects List. It is a valuable tool used to advocate for support and funding for critical infrastructure improvements that strengthen the St. Louis region's position as a world-class freight and logistics hub. We now plan to take a closer look at how recent and ongoing conflict in the Red Sea area, low water levels in the Panama Canal, and other geopolitical incidents have resulted in global supply chains facing unprecedented challenges as shippers work to reroute vessels and navigate transit interruptions and delays. We'll learn about the greatest risk impacting the ability of U.S. companies to access suppliers and how the St. Louis region is playing a part in helping to address these latest supply chain disruptions. I'm joined today by Panos, the Emerson Distinguished Professor of Supply Chain Operations and Technology at the Olin Business School at Washington University in St. Louis and Director of the Boeing Center for Supply Chain Innovation. Welcome, Panos, and let's start with a quick introduction of your background and your role with Washington University.
Mary, it is great to see you. I would like to tell you a little about my role at Western University in St. Louis. I teach at the Olin Business School the topic of supply chain operations and technology, and I also hold the Emerson chair in that specific area. And I direct the research center we have, the so-called Boeing Center of Supply Chain Innovation, and I have directed it the last 20 years or so.
Great. Well, it's great to have you with us. Now let's set the stage for today's conversation by telling us a little bit about the supply chain risk you see on the horizon and how they differ from what we saw during the recent pandemic.
The pandemic was a big shock for supply chains, and most of the companies experienced it at the beginning as a supply shock. Factories not being available to produce, having all challenges on the shipping side and so on. But later, when we looked at it, it was actually a demand shock that created most of the troubles during the pandemic. As consumers started seeing shortages, or companies started experiencing supply shortages, we saw a certain hoarding behavior, placing very large orders, much more than what was needed, and that drove a huge load on the supply system, and especially on the logistics and shipping system, and that created all types of delays. So there was a change of consumer behavior during the pandemic as we were sitting at home, and changed the nature of our activities as well as the type of orders that we placed. Definitely the supply chains were overloaded. It took quite a while. It was at least 2 years before we could come to something that looked like normal, and probably it was the mid of 2023 where we saw the supply chain stabilizing. Now, as we look into the future, the nature of the risks are different than the risks that we faced during the pandemic. And I would say the major category of those type of risks are geopolitical risks, and at the same time concerns about the environment as well as other social responsibility issues around the world, which might limit access to suppliers. Just to give a quick list, and then probably we can talk more about those. At this point in time, the tensions between US and China are concerning because we are so heavily dependent on Chinese supply chains. In some cases, in certain industries like solar panels and batteries and electric vehicles, they almost have the struggle hold on the supply chain. Then, of course, the Russia-Ukraine war has been going for 2 years. It had certain implications on the agribusiness side, for wheat, for fertilizers, and definitely oil and gas implications, as well as shipping out of the Baltic Sea. As you mentioned in your introduction, the last few months we have been concerned about canals that are very important for the ocean shipping. The Panama Canal You can say this global warming, you can say are other weather events that are happening more frequently and more serious. In that situation is a drought condition, lower water levels out of the lake that is feeding the logs. That has limited the capacity of that channel by around 1/3. And that, of course, affects the eastern side of the United States and the ports that are served by the canal. Then another war, the Israel-Hamas war, has created a certain reaction at Yemen, and the Houthi attacks, they will claim they're attacking ships in retaliation for this war. I'm not sure if it might be a pretense for it, but it's happening. It's happening the last few months and hasn't yet stopped. As a result of that, the access to the Red Sea and then finally to the Suez Canal, which is extremely important, 10 to 15% of the oil trade goes through that canal, have been seriously disrupted. And as a result, they need to route around, go through the southern part of Africa, which easily can add 2 weeks and has millions in extra cost for shipping companies. We always talk about black swan events in supply chains, and we saw one of those large container ships hitting the Key Bridge in Baltimore and bringing it down, causing a serious disruption for the Baltimore port. And again, that is going to drive a certain rerouting. So these are risks that we need to think about and start considering them. And sometimes we think some of those risks being far away, but they are not that far. I believe companies in our region have to think about them. If you are in the agribusiness setting, it is either a risk or sometimes might be an opportunity, but definitely companies like Bunge and Bayer will be affected for sure through the Russia-Ukraine war, as well as they're using a lot of ocean shipping, and how do they get their products out there to markets, what happens with the Panama Canal and potentially even the Suez Canal. Then there are other companies like either on the chemical side, like Millipore Sigma, or on the pharmaceutical side, even if you are just sourcing pharmaceuticals like Express Scripts, that will be affected with all the disruptions that I just mentioned above. So the disruptions are there of a different nature, and as we start thinking about creating resilient supply chains for the future, we need to look into these new type of risks.
Very good. Okay, so the St. Louis region has gained recognition in recent years as a global freight hub, and our region's port system is ranked the most efficient inland port in the nation in terms of tons moved per river mile. Is there a role this region can play in helping to address these latest supply chain disruptions?
Mary, yes, I believe. I think there is an opportunity for our region to play the role of a flexible logistics hub. And I believe we have made the investments and we have built the infrastructure, and I believe your organization, St. Louis Regional Freightways, have made the right investments to create the flexibility in the infrastructure. Of course, what really it means is as the rerouting is happening, either from the east or the west, and things have to be accessed somewhere in the inland, or products have to move from the north and let's say go further south to hit the New Orleans port. A river is a great asset. The rail infrastructure that we have is a great asset, and we are quite famous as a region that heavily invested in intermodal. So all those will create the flexibility. Supply chains react to disruptions by exercising the flexibility they have. And I believe that is the opportunity for our region, and we already have heavily invested in building this type of flexibility. Investments in the highways, the I-70 and the 270, I believe, is close to $500 million that I believe have been made. The replacement of the Merchant Bridge, which will be very important, connecting the St. Louis with the Illinois region, crucial. That is for sure there, and definitely investments that we have made in intermodal assets are extremely important. At the same time, I believe the opportunity as we will try to reduce the dependence on the Chinese supply chains. And for other reasons also, being closer to markets will require some resourcing of manufacturing capacity. And there are opportunities for our region to play a bigger role in those environments. Recent story where ICL, a $10 billion global company, is building a battery production facility. Those LFP batteries, lithium iron phosphate batteries, are extremely important, both for supporting the renewable energy as well as supporting the electric vehicle industries and other energy industries. That is a great example of manufacturing capacity actually getting built around St. Louis. And there are a lot more opportunities. There are areas where we're very strong. Aerospace, we are one of the major regions that has manufacturing capabilities on the aerospace side. Boeing is planning to invest close to $2 billion, I believe, in the near future in increasing their presence in terms of manufacturing in our region. And I think we have definitely the knowledge and somewhat the capabilities with the right investments, either from the state or coming from the federal government in biosciences and agribusiness and even pharmaceuticals to have a presence. So if we look at it as being really the region that has the flexibility on the logistics and the manufacturing side, we will do really well as companies are thinking and start taking actions in creating resilience for future shocks.
So we hear those terms that you mentioned, the de-risking and the decoupling, a lot as it relates to supply chains and the U.S.-China relationship. Help our audience understand what both of those terms mean and which one of these strategies make the most sense for the U.S.
I emphasize the heavy dependence on our Chinese supply chains. The macroeconomic level, when you go and you look at the imports that are coming into the U.S., 2017 or 18, it will be at the level of around 22-23% of the imports coming from China. And it's not just the percentage, it's the fact that certain critical supply chains are almost completely dominated. So when you start thinking about, let's say, renewable energy and solar panels, it is amazing. If you go and you analyze the supply chain all the way from the beginning, the polysilicon and the ingots and the wafers, and then making the solar cells, and then finally the solar cells are put into solar panels and installed. The early stages all the way to solar cells at the level of 70-80% of the capacity is controlled by China. So the only presence we have is in the later stages in installation of solar panels. So this is a crucial industry as we try to accelerate the trend towards renewable energy usage. For the electric vehicles, the crucial component, of course, are the batteries. And then the batteries is the same kind of a story. Even though the Chinese don't necessarily control the mines, they have strong relationships with the miners, either in Africa or in Latin America. They fully control the refining capacity of the minerals. And then they control mostly the production of the battery cells, which, the cathode anodes, and finally the battery cells. And then more or less what we see when we see battery facilities in the US, they are taking battery cells that are coming from Asia and putting them together into a battery. So this is a crucial supply chain that we need to somewhat find a way to better control. So the reason that I went to that is, first of all, to emphasize we have heavy dependence. And I gave you examples, of course, in the renewable energy and the solar panels and the batteries and the electric vehicles. So we have similar dependency with respect to pharmaceuticals. Most of the active ingredients are coming from China. And quite a lot of the facilities are not in China, they are in India. So there's a heavy dependence of our healthcare supply chains, as we saw it with protective and personal equipment, the PPEs during the pandemic, but also on the pharmaceutical side, which is a certain concern. Even electronic products, your smartphones, 90% of them are made in China. So that is really somewhat the problem which we try to address. And the one is to say, well, we're going to completely decouple and create regional supply chains that are going to respond to our markets. good idea, but not easy. It requires a heavy investment because we are lacking the manufacturing capacity, we are lacking the suppliers, we are lacking access to the right resources, and it's not going to happen. Might happen at some point in time if we make the right investments, but it can't happen in the short term. So that is what is called decoupling, and in certain industries we should try to do more of the decoupling as fast as we can. In other industries might not necessarily be needed. The products are not as crucial, we can find suppliers in different parts of the world and easily shift our purchases around this kind of a supply base. So the notion of a de-risking is, at least in the short term, how I can diversify my risks. Can I find another supplier outside of China, in other parts of Asia? It could be in Central America, it could be in Mexico, it could be in South America. That is some kind of a de-risking approach, which I believe in the short term is going to work well. In the longer term, as we emphasize for a few industries, we've got to make the investments to bring as much of the manufacturing capacity and the required resources to create regional supply chains. So that is the general direction I believe that the US is following. I believe there's a rather strategic decision that we will try to do smart strategies depending on the industry, focus strategies, try to decouple a little more for crucial industries, try to exert more of a de-risking approach for other industries, heavy emphasis on trying to diversify supply bases and source from other countries. That's where the India, the Vietnam, the Cambodia, the Thailand are coming in. The warning there is we have to be a little careful because Chinese are transshipping through some of these countries, so therefore we might not be necessarily moving away from the Chinese supply chains. But for sure we have opportunities. Mexico has benefited tremendously out of this shifting in strategies. Right now it's the second largest source of imports for the US. They have passed, I believe, last year China. So definitely we rely so heavily on Mexico, but we will see opportunities in Central America and Latin America, especially Argentina, Brazil, Chile, for us to diversify. This approach, I believe it will work, and at the same time with industrial policies, either at the federal or the state level, will give opportunities for the right manufacturing investments, developing the supply bases and building the logistic capabilities to create these effective regional supply chains. And I think that's where is also the opportunity for our region.
So let's keep talking about the de-risking part. What steps is the U.S. taking as part of that de-risking approach, and are there any of these efforts playing out here in the bi-state region?
Mary, as we discussed, the first level is you try to diversify your supplier base. It's what the corporate managers like to call China plus one or China plus two. So if I have suppliers in China, I would like to find those suppliers somewhere else, at least one or two other environments. That is happening almost across all of the industries. For certain industries, that is not going to help us very much. The solar panels and the batteries, we need to take a much more drastic approach where we will start creating the supply chains much closer and we control them at a higher level. So that's where industrial policy is trying to give the incentives for companies to make the manufacturing investments, either in the solar panel side or on the battery side. Of course, the other industry or technology that is absolutely crucial are semiconductors. In semiconductors, we do have the advantage in the sense that we are leading the knowledge space on that, and we design the most advanced products, but we don't manufacture them. And those products are manufactured in the majority in Taiwan, which obviously in a conflict with China is at risk. So therefore, for that chain, we got to find ways to create manufacturing capacity in the US or in North America, or definitely friendly countries that we can access. And we have to go all the way back, controlling the equipment that are used in these facilities that make these advanced products. So there is an investment approach and try to do it, but it can't happen in the very short term. The de-risking through supplier diversification is easier, but it's much easier for products like toys or clothes or those type of issues, but might be harder in other environments. So that's when we think it from the region, and we talked about being the flexible hub. I believe these kind of disruptions that might happen in the supply chains will either drive rerouting, which will create new logistics needs to move things within the country, and that's the flexibility of the logistic hub. But I hope we take the advantage to build the manufacturing capabilities that are needed, right? In taking advantage either federal incentives in certain industries, like the ICL facility that is developed, we can have the same advantages as implied in biosciences or geospatial, which might be important. The agribusiness is a great sector we have. And the agribusiness is going to play in many of the initiatives, especially on the renewable energy side. Soybeans into bioethanol, it is something we will see more investments. Our companies like Bunge and Bayer are very well positioned to take advantage of that. As we start thinking about bringing pharmaceutical supply chains closer in the market, some of our companies, either on the chemical side or participating on the distribution, are going to play a big role. I believe there are opportunities there that we need to take advantage. But when we start thinking about what makes it hard to bring back, restore the manufacturing, is not just the investment, but is having the right workforce. So workforce development is extremely important. And workforce development that is building the skills that are needed, like what we have seen, the Boeing pre-employment training to create the mechanics that will work for the increased manufacturing capacity in the St. Louis region would be a great type of initiative, and we need to do more of that as we start looking at the industries we would like to attract in our region. And as I emphasized, I believe we should take advantage of where we have tremendous capabilities and companies that are great. Right? I always think the agribusiness, the biosciences, and because of the other assets we have around this region might be great for making the right investments and leading the future in restoring supply chains. I think that is more or less what I think about it, but definitely the decoupling is just as a summary kind of a question. Decoupling might be a priority for certain crucial industries, but it will take some time. It's serious investments. De-risking in the sense of diversifying supply bases is going to happen a lot more. And if that is the case, then we should be participating in both trends. Either attracting the manufacturing investment, convincing companies we have the tremendous flexibility on the intermodal logistics side and an amazing port to take care of their shipping needs as they try to address disruption by using regions that have flexibility.
Okay, Panos, is there anything else on this topic that we haven't touched on that you think our audience should know?
Mary, I would like to go back to the beginning of our discussion and somewhat summarize this in a certain way. We talked about the pandemic and what we learned out of it. Definitely what we learned is that for quite a while we overinvested in efficiency and we created extremely efficient supply chains, but they were not ready for certain shocks, supply or demand shocks. So we're underinvesting in resilience. And hopefully this is a lesson we don't forget. Rather easy to forget now, we don't see the immediate shocks that we had over the pandemic. Many companies feel like their supply chains were resilient in the past. But resilience is about dealing with future shocks and making investments to deal with the future shocks. And we argued about how the risks that we are facing now are more geopolitical, are environmental, are associated in many cases with some social responsibility issues that might limit access, forced labor situations, let's say in the Xinjiang region in China and the Uyghurs, the Muslim minority there that is used as forced labor. We're not allowed to source from this type of suppliers, and these suppliers provide cotton, these suppliers provide semiconductors, so that is a concern, so a risk that you need to address. So as we try to build resilience, we need to make investments, and the investments in the short term are harder to justify, right? So we are very fast in going back to building for efficiency in short term, ignoring the risks associated with these future shocks that we discussed about. And that requires the right investments coordinated over a period of time if we are going to resource certain supply chains and we are going to create the right flexibility. So I hope that companies are really thinking it that way. They are ready to make the resilience investments, and I believe for our region, this is the opportunity to be the region that has provided the flexible hub, the intermodal capabilities, the easy ability to do rerouting through our region, and at the same time taking advantage of the manufacturing opportunities that exist in certain industries that can define our region as being the leading edge region in certain industries like agribusiness, biosciences, aerospace, and so on. Look at it as risk, that is the one side. Look at it as an opportunity. And I believe for our region at this point in time, and I believe your organization has been making the right investments, looking at it as an opportunity as we create the flexible capabilities for the future.
Thank you, Panos. Today's discussion has been fascinating. It's clear that supply chain disruptions are likely to be the norm for the foreseeable future. While that poses a host of challenges, you've helped us to understand some of the strategies being deployed here in the United States to navigate those challenges. You've also given our audience great insight into the role the St. Louis region can play in improving alternatives for shippers and as a location for future investment. We thank you for your time.
Mary, thank you.
I'd also like to thank our sponsors for FreightWeekSTL 2024. Their support makes it possible for us to continue to deliver the great content that is a hallmark of this annual conference. Our presenting sponsors are Emerson, Illinois Railroad Association, and Steadfast City. Our supporting sponsors are the Boeing Center, Contegra, Design 9, H&TB, the Hauser Group, and the Jerry Costello Group. Freight Week continues this afternoon with a panel discussion called Charting the Course for Logistics. It will feature updates from representatives of the St. Louis region's world-class multimodal freight network. They will discuss the latest trends in freight movement through the region by rail, river, roads, and runways, and highlight the tremendous optionality for shippers that exist in the bi-state area. We hope you can join us then and encourage you to share links to any of our Freight Week content with others who may be interested.